I'm Jonathan Lowe. I have built context graphs and AI automations that saved time and money. This talk demystifies those concepts with real operations data and use cases. As Alex said, at Pfizer, I ran a team of 200 people that connected 2 terabytes of data in Neo4j to unite the operations of 20,000 shop floor workers, quality lab analysts, supply chain planners, and lean manufacturing leaders across 35 global sites. Now I run a startup called Amalgo that helps manufacturing companies turn connected data into insights and savings. So, speaking of savings, are any of you trying to achieve gains like these in your operations? There are savings in both time and money, like 29% faster throughput and gross profit up 10%. Would you be surprised to hear that a single operational change can drive all of these improvements? The change is how fast you resolve deviations. In case you're new to quality assurance, any deviation from standard operating procedure, like finding a spider in a pill jar, requires an investigation. To be clear, deviations are not only about insects. Investigations happen for all deviations, from minor paperwork mistakes to major equipment failures. But the regulatory expectation is that you will open an investigation to find the root cause, correct the problem, and apply preventive actions, all within 30 days of discovery. Let's dig more into that. In case, charting the 30-day target reveals the human nature behind investigations. In this chart, the x-axis measures the number of days to close an investigation, and the y-axis measures how many investigations got closed on that day over, for instance, a year's worth of investigations. Can you interpret what's happening here? People often procrastinate until just before the deadline to close their investigations, or they miss the deadline altogether, creating a long tail of late investigations. Even with human nature, though, if a QA team closes 75% of their investigations within, let's say, 10 days, rather than the traditional 30 days, the metric impact is surprisingly significant. The chart on the right shows how a 10% increase in gross profit looks for a small molecule operation with 8 products, 2 sites, and 1 distribution hub, tracked over 18 months of demand. For that period, gross profit is $730 million higher, with a 10-day investigation target versus a 30. So a 10% gain in gross profit is a bold claim, I admit, and I wouldn't blame you for feeling skeptical. Let's talk about why reduced investigation closure time has such a big impact on supply chain metrics. It's more straightforward than you might think. The answer is simply that an investigation is a freeze on physical inventory. Here's how that freeze ripples through 8 different metrics for that same 8 product, 2 site, 1 hub, 18-month example we talked about a moment ago. Wave 1 is direct holding effects. The batches impacted by investigations can't be released until their investigations close. A 30-day target freezes each batch cohort 3 times longer than a 10-day target. That triples the standing pool of frozen, unsellable inventory. This directly inflates inventory holding costs, as you would expect, and it impacts internal throughput time, also known as per batch internal cycle time. A batch caught in an investigation accrues the entire hold as throughput time, but shorter holds shrink both the mean and the 90th percentile tail. Wave 2, here we go. So wave 1, inventory holding and internal throughput time. That's a direct impact of the shorter or longer investigation and the freeze. Wave 2 is the bullwhip amplifier. where frozen upstream inventory starves the downstream warehouse, which fires expedited orders. The scheduler reacts by overproducing to refill the temporary holes. Despite that overproduction, when a batch cohort is frozen for 30 days, the orders waiting on that material miss their delivery targets, creating late penalties. With 10-day investigations, batches return to the inventory in time to ship, more often than with a 30-day. So you can see here the late penalties and the expedite orders being impacted by the bullwhip amplifier. Wave 3 is the overproduction echo. The more you make, the more it costs. More raw materials cost, more QC testing cost, more scrap waste, and more batches scrapped. So shorter investigations run the recipe fewer times because the scheduler isn't chasing inventory it didn't really need. In short, cutting the target from 30 to 10 days deflates the entire cascade of waves. You'll also notice in the lower right corner how internal process lead time average per order hardly changes at all. Why is that? It's because order lead time is dominated by structural regional transit windows of 18 to 56 days, which investigation duration can't touch. So this transit bound metric isn't impacted by the frozen WIP. By the way, I'm using a lot of supply chain terms. I know that as an audience, you know a lot about it already, but if you're not familiar with the bullwhip effect, you can learn a lot about it, as I have, from Transcentis Consulting, a German firm run by Oliver Grassel that uses graph technology to model supply chain processes right in your backyard. Okay, the metrics suggest that reducing investigation time has a solid return on investment. So how do we speed up investigations? The lever we're talking about today is automation, getting a machine to do tasks that humans used to do, but faster. To automate investigations, we have to know what current ones look like. So let's start with their workflow. All biopharma companies manufacturing in the same country have to follow the same regulations. The regulations specify outcomes without dictating specific workflows. You've got to achieve immediate triage, written records, root cause identification, impact checks, and CAPAs, or corrective and preventive actions. How you achieve that is up to your company or site. As an example, here's one company's 30-day sequential investigation workflow for a bioreactor pH deviation. Let's step through it because we're going to use this as a reference for the whole talk. In this example, the workflow has four main phases. First is discovery, where someone observes the deviation and logs it and assigns an investigator. The second is investigation, where the investigator figures out what happened. The third is impact. The QA team takes an inventory of which batches are involved. And the fourth is CAPA. The QA team corrects the problem and makes process adjustments to prevent it from happening again. Then managers approve and close the investigation. Again, another company or site investigating this same deviation might follow a different set of phases than this example, as long as they satisfy those regulatory outcomes. Within the four phases, QA teams typically try to follow the same sequence of steps regardless of the type of deviation. For instance, the company where this example came from specifies 9 steps for a minor deviation at the top and 13 steps for a major deviation at the bottom. So they don't require CAPA for minor deviations. These are the paths they would love to follow if everything goes smoothly. But everything doesn't always go smoothly. Here's an example of a real investigation requiring many retries and reviews until, at last, after 34 steps and 51 days, it was finally closed. I share this because unpredictable workflows like this one are both common in investigation processing and have made investigations hard to automate prior to the rise of AI. Now let's look at people. The red circles highlight all the different roles involved in conducting just this one example investigation. We've got operators, supervisors, QA folks, investigators, the various folks on the team, the engineering manager, a QA director. The radial org chart highlights individual people filling those roles for one investigation, and it illustrates the need for coordination across departmental reporting lines. The different colors in the radial chart show different departments, and you can see that there are people across many of them. Experience also matters a lot when assigning people to investigations. If the deviation impacts high-value batches, the manager might want people with longer tenure to conduct the investigation. As with workflow, this complex staffing has also been challenging to automate in the past. In fact, some companies may not even release tenure information about their employees, and you just have to hope that the managers know over time who's been there the longest. But the challenges of managing investigations came before the latest big idea, which is, wait for it, context graphs. Late in December 2025, Jaya Gupta and Ashu Garg of Frontier Capital published a viral article titled AI's Trillion-Dollar Opportunity, Context Graphs. They say true autonomy, meaning AI agents taking actions, requires a history of contextual information about past decisions. Our systems of record already capture a history of what happened, but to make smart decisions, AI agents need context on why it happened. They're not talking about new technology, just about a particular type of data stored in a graph database for use by AI agents. And I would say for humans in the loop. But this article is about automation with agents. They categorize this data as either rules that tell the agent what should happen in general and decision traces, how rules were applied in the past for specific cases. It's the decision traces where the exceptions are and precedents live. Decision traces can pull data from human interactions, like meeting minutes or text chats, but they really could come from anywhere, including tacit knowledge in people's heads. The table gives two examples of rules and exceptions, such as a severity classification rule in the top row and a case where it did not apply. And in a context graph, there would be many, many, many of these examples of where it did or did not apply. To better illustrate the concept, though, let's look at a sequence of real-world events and how we might capture them in a context graph. Start with the real-world event on 2025, November 8th. Tessa Scanlon noted excessive vibration in the BPE 750, causing loose fasteners and inconsistent seals on several batches of pharmaceuticals. So in a context graph, we could capture this story in 6 nodes and 5 relationships: people, process, events, equipment, material, and the connections between them. Next, another real-world event happens. We get the assessing process. The seal issue may affect product effectiveness, so all impacted batches are quarantined for investigation on 2025, November 9th by Aideen Walters. We build the new nodes and relationships on the existing ones. Both batches get quarantined. But then there's an exception. One batch is taken out of quarantine early because it's an ingredient to an expedited downstream recipe. This happens sometimes. We manufacture at risk. And in this example, we've added a process order node to request that the expedited batch be expedited, and we've updated one of the quarantines relationships with new properties. But there are many different ways to capture that exception. This is just to illustrate the concept. I'm wondering, with this concept, are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing about this context graphs idea? As much as people agree that the concept will inevitably be implemented, they also recognize that the majority of contextual data is not yet captured. So the rise of context graphs will be gradual. This isn't just me seeing this or you seeing this, others have as well. Dharmesh Shah, the HubSpot CTO and co-founder, commented that building up a context graph was like installing a three-car garage before owning a car. Not very strong support there. Even the article's author, Jaya Gupta, observed in an interview that some Fortune 50 companies might not have the data maturity to be ready for context graphs. But in highly regulated industries like biopharma, we have a special head start. Consider two popular software tools, TrackWise and Viva, that support QA investigations. For years, both of these tools have been quietly capturing context data to inform audits. This graph diagram shows what they've captured. In orange and yellow at the bottom, the people responsible for discovery, investigation, and approval. In blue in the middle, the process steps and their dates from observation to investigation to closure. In pink, near the top, text descriptions of what happened, the root cause, the severity, the kappa, and the effectiveness check related to the processes that generated them. In purple at the upper right, the impacted batches and materials. That's rich context data. It's time to get to work on our automation challenge using this data. Let's take advantage of the context graph data and AI to redesign the traditional investigation workflow we looked at earlier. Is there any reason these phases and steps taking 30 days have to take 30 days? I talked to Amy Harp, founder of Sakara Digital and a deep expert in quality operations. Amy assured me that process change and automation could dramatically reduce investigation time. She also encouraged enabling investigators to focus on investigations rather than being spread across many other processes. I highly recommend, I highly recommend talking to Amy about quality operations if this is something you think can be improved in your organization. So we'll explore some automation approaches for each phase, starting with discovery. The budget for discovery is traditionally 1 to 3 days. Automation could trim it to 1 day. Investigations can be triggered by a system rather than a human. Agents can assign an investigator and fill out some forms automatically. And let's see what one biopharma company has done to fast track investigator assignment. So automatically assigning investigators to investigations rather than picking them manually or using a round robin system requires some way of evaluating investigator performance. Each deviation is unique and each investigation is different. So how can you score an investigator's work? One way is timely closure. If the target closure time is 30 days, any investigation that takes longer reduces its investigator's score. The best investigators close 100% of their investigations on time. This app tracks that score, as you can see in the second from right, or the second from the far right column. Investigators usually own multiple investigations at the same time. More concurrent investigations eventually result in more late closures. The old adage about if you want to get something done, ask a busy person actually isn't true statistically. We can analyze each investigator's closure history to see what their investigation capacity is and try not to overload them above that level. This app also tracks capacity for each investigator. Then AI can detect whether an investigator is over capacity and identify the best alternate investigators to reassign for better balance. The recommendations to shift 2 investigators to other people appear here. Timely closure stats also tell us what kinds of deviations each investigator is better at or worse at investigating. In the side panel here, we see how timely Teagan Corey has been when investigating different categories of deviation or when the impacted batches were of a certain kind of material. If I were scrolling down in the live application, you'd see several other ways of categorizing his effectiveness for different sorts of investigation qualities. Using these stats, when new deviations happen, an AI can assign them to investigators who have the best timely closure history with similar deviations or materials or whatever the category might be. Initial investigator assignments may not be a good fit if done manually or using round robin, so AI can recommend reassignment to another investigator who exhibited past timely closure for a given type of deviation. Clicking on the red reassignment button shows the manager some ranked choices for alternate investigator assignments. So here we're saying Aideen Walters might be replaced by Roy Cody on this particular investigation, and we see why Roy is perhaps better suited. Now, you might wonder how this actually worked in a real situation. So what kind of impact does an application like this have? The Manufacturing Leadership Council of the National Association of Manufacturers recognized Michelle Ong's innovative work on AI to assign investigations not only to the most capable investigators, but as evenly as possible across a team, rather than overloading some and underutilizing others. Michelle built and deployed the Equalizer app you've just seen to a site's investigators. This site assigned new investigations from a round-robin list and wanted to opt in to Michelle's app, leaving it to the manager to decide whether or not to reassign investigators based on the app's suggestions. Very much a human-in-the-loop experiment. Historically, on-time investigation closure at that site had been steadily below the 80% target, so they had a lot of late investigations. After going live, Michelle noticed that the percent of investigations closed on time began fluctuating up and down. Of course, being a data scientist, she was curious. She wanted to know why, so she cross-referenced investigator reassignment to on-time closure percentage week over week. The pattern is pretty clear. Can you see it? For each team she tracked, when managers took the time to reassign investigators, on-time closure improved. But as time passed, the round-robin assignments made closure less timely again. So Michelle wanted not only to see that reassignment was effective in increasing on-time closure, but why it was happening. So she added data about when the managers used her application. And again, a clear correlation emerged. Manufacturers were using her tool for reassignment guidance, and when they applied it, investigations got done on time. This is a good one if you're trying to promote the use of digital tools in general in your application, not just tracking the improvements, but tracking how your applications were part of the solution to getting those improvements. So what's the obvious next step based on Michelle's graph? If the QA managers agreed, the team could replace round-robin assignments with an AI agent that uses Michelle's algorithm. Of course, leave the manager the option to change the assignment, but start with a data-driven assignment based on history and capacity. Back to our automation plan. Next is the investigation phase. How can we reduce the time from 9 days to 3 days? A larger move that opens up numerous downstream automation opportunities is to connect data across the organization in a knowledge graph or to model operations in a digital twin. This is a major undertaking, but with big benefits. There isn't time today to do this topic justice, but focusing just on our investigation story, connected data creates ripple effects. For example, if your engineering data knows which sensors are in which equipment, and your planning data knows which equipment processed which batches, and your operations data knows who ran the equipment that day, and your supply chain data knows what material each batch is made of, and your QC data knows which batches failed which tests, And if all this data already exists in systems of record already running in most biopharma operations, ERPs, LIMS, QMS, CMMS, HCM, then when all that data is connected, anomaly detection uses relevant filtered data to get more accurate comparisons. For instance, any sensor reading can automatically be compared to past sensor data just for that equipment, processing just that same material, even run by just that same crew. So when QC asks why this batch failed a test, the connected data can immediately and confidently isolate relevant anomalous sensor readings to pinpoint the root cause. There's so much more to say about knowledge graphs, but let's move on with the few minutes that we have left to look at the impact phase. How do we reduce it from 8 days to 3 days? Most quality organizations require a historical review of similar deviations in case past resolutions can inform the current investigation. When done manually, this research can take a lot of time and still be incomplete. AI has become very good at detecting phrases with similar meanings. A proven time-saving approach to historical review is to use a technique called sentence embedding on all past investigation documentation, then use an AI capability called similarity detection to rank the most relevant past investigations by meaning, not keyword, to a current one. In this example, the investigator described the deviation very loosely in just one sentence. We found mold growing within a chamber of the tablet press in our Ireland plant. The application returns a ranked list of prior similar deviations and investigation outcomes, and then investigators can scan for relevant insights of any of those returned deviations and investigations much more quickly than they could in a manual search. Okay, we're almost there. Last but not least, the CAPA and approvals. AI can help us shave 10 days down to 3 days in a couple of ways. Again, CAPA stands for corrective actions and preventive actions. Part of setting effective CAPAs is understanding the root cause of a deviation, so let's start there. The same AI similarity search capability that helped with historical review also helps create a list of probable root causes, ranked by likelihood, as illustrated here. Knowing the root cause guides establishment of CAPAs, and AI can help with that too. But first, it's worth noting that our industry is facing a crisis of expertise. The average worker tenure is shrinking dramatically. A study by LNS Research says average tenure was 20 years before the pandemic, and by 2023 had dropped to just 3 years. And that this is experienced by the majority of manufacturers. This matters a lot for setting CAPAs because experience tells an analyst what has worked best in the past. Fortunately, even junior workers can quickly establish CAPAs based on the same AI similarity search capability we used in historical review and root cause suggestions. By digesting all past CAPAs for similar deviations, AI can list and rank potential CAPAs for a new deviation, giving both junior and senior quality analysts a starting selection rather than a blank page. We can also reduce investigation time by routing the approvals automatically and intelligently. This algorithm is complex and difficult to illustrate, but here's a general idea. With context from prior investigations in our graph, an AI can see which sequence of approvers closed investigations most efficiently in the past. Then, like a generative AI large language model, making sentences statistically, word by word, an AI agent can route each step of an investigation to the most efficient next person from the pool. Availability, tenure, subject matter, and severity of the deviation also play into that algorithm, but the context of prior approval chains is a necessary ingredient and is all part of the context data already captured by tools like TrackWise and Viva. So now we have an automation plan for reducing investigation closure times from 30 days to 10 days. If those automations reduce investigation closure time and still satisfy all the regulations, we win. Because even if we can't hit investigation closure targets as ambitious as 10 days, Any reduction will increase our gross profit, reduce our cycle times, and boost our delivery reputation. In summary, using context graph data to drive a unified AI automation plan in conjunction with process improvements will get medicines to patients faster. Here's contact information if you're interested in discussing any of these topics further. Thank you very much.